Hi, this is Forum 6 entitled Why Do We Pray? And in response to the questions, the first question is if God already knows what we need before we ask, then what's the purpose of prayer? And my thought is the question itself has this inherent assumption that being that we tend to pray when we need something from God. But I would argue that's not the real purpose of prayer. When Jesus prayed, it wasn't because he was about to go pray for somebody and needed to get authority to act. He was often all ready to work miracles because he had already spent time with his Father. So really, prayer was a manner of just communication. It was relationship building for Jesus with his Father. It was a connection to his heart. And so maybe when we hear the word prayer, we think about it differently, but really in its simplest form, prayer is just communication with God. And just like communication with anyone that you're wanting to build a relationship with, prayer allows you the avenue to learn God's heart, his character. So, why do you want to know his character? Well, because if you've experienced salvation, then hopefully you've also experienced the desire to live life differently than you were before. And it was a transformative experience. And that ability to transform your life comes from knowing God's heart, knowing his character, knowing the things that he has called you to for your life. And to know those things, you have to know God, and you have to ask him. You have to talk to him. And that's the purpose of prayer, is learning those things. So how should one incorporate prayer into his or her daily life? I thought this was kind of funny when I was doing some just quick research. The Apostle Paul is really redundant in his description of how you're supposed to incorporate prayer into your daily life. It seems like almost every one of his letters to the church, various churches, he instructs them on the importance and the constancy of prayer. So in Acts 2:42, he says, "And they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers." And I thought that was interesting because, you break bread every day, multiple times a day, and prayers is kind of synonymous with that. So it's like, do this all the time. Romans 12:12, rejoice in hope, be patient in tribulation, be constant in prayer. Again, frequency it's constant. 1 Corinthians 7:5, do not deprive one another of each other, as they're saying, except perhaps by agreement for a limited time, that you may devote yourselves to prayer. So it's like, okay, stay with each other, support each other, but you need to pray too. So don't skip that. Ephesians, praying at all times in the Spirit with prayer and supplication at all times. Again, it's constant. Colossians 4:2, continue steadfastly in prayer. And then obviously the famous one, 1 Thessalonians, pray without ceasing. So we're supposed to pray early and often, making it kind of a second nature kind of activity, so that we can know him and so that we can do what he's called us to in our lives. And that allows us to be an encouragement to others, so we can represent his heart to others. And so we're able to respond to situations in life with the power and the authority that he's given to us. And we only really know that authority if we know him in his heart. So one specific instance of when I prayed and God answered that specific prayer, I think I've talked about this before, and I'll try to be fast. My daughter Kelsey, she's now 16 going on 17. And but when she was 7 months old, she was in PICU, pediatric ICU. She had been diagnosed with infant ALL, which is a type of leukemia, at 7 months old. And because she was so young, and because she actually was still recovering from infant pneumonia, they didn't expect much success in treating her. We had to immediately go into surgery so that they could put a central line in her chest, so that they could start administering chemotherapy intravenously. And so she went into surgery, they put the line in, and she never woke up. And, so when we were finally able to go back and see her, she was seizing, she was blue. And it was really only breathing machines that were keeping her alive at that point in terms of how you define that in physical terms. So every morning, they would clear her lungs and try to get her to breathe on her own. And for 6 days, they tested her every morning, and she was never able to breathe on her own. So that sixth night, I stayed with her in the room. I remember feeling like I just needed to be there for protection. And I prayed that night that she'd be able to support her own breathing without any additional assistance the next morning. And it all looked, it's just one of those hopeless kind of scenarios. But anyway, I worshiped all night, and the next morning, the nurses came in to do their regular thing. They cleared her lungs, and then they took her off the breathing machines, and that was morning 7, and she passed the test. So that's when we started walking through the remaining portion of the healing process for her body. And there's just a testimony. It's like I knew in that moment that we had the authority to be her covering and pray over her, and that our new goal was then to pray for protection over her body while we had to walk through the chemotherapy process. But anyway, that's my story. Thanks.